Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how you can get started. I just posted a video the other day, yesterday, and it really caught on. I made a few Reddit posts that really caught on, and a lot of comments were, I'm in an apartment, I can't get started. You have so much land, I can't do it, even though the video directly addressed that. I'm going to tell you how you can get started doing what I'm doing. You can do it from an apartment building. You can do it right now from whatever your situation in life is today. You can start this today. And it's building your mental database of plants by getting out in nature, getting some fresh air, and having a lot of fun. So come along with me. I'm going to go on my lunch break at work, and I'm going to show you guys how I got started in all this. I didn't get started by planting trees. I got started by doing some research and investigation and observing the wild world around me and building that mental model of all the plant and material that's all around me that I can use. And the best part about this is when you figure out the plants that you want to use, you can do this for free. Then you're going to want to get off the beaten trail. There? Let's go there. You can find some neat little places as well. And now you just point your camera at the ground and try to identify every single plant that you see. All in the wild spaces. What are these? What is all of this stuff? Take photos of it. Get it plant ID'd. You never know what you find. There's no berries on this, but this is currants. The birds must have got them all. And you get better and better at identifying all these plants. Here's another currant bush. Right here. Oh, look at this. Was I right or what? Awesome. And try and figure out what everything is. Be careful of poison ivy, poison oak, that sort of stuff. But you never know what you find. A lot of weeds are edible. Now, while you're outside, make sure you're paying attention. Look at all the trees. You never know what you might find. In the wildest of places, you can find a mulberry tree. I found another gem here. It's a wild serviceberry tree. Beautiful. Look at this. Will my camera focus in on the berries? Kind of. You can see one. So, serviceberry tree, edible fruit, delicious. Just do yourself a favor and look in the berry first for any kind of pinhole. That typically says that there's a larva of a fly inside the berry. Don't ask me how I know that. Something else to keep your eyes open for is any kind of bean pod. Any bean pod, especially if it's accompanied by leaves that are opposite, meaning both leaves come out of the same point of the stem. That is usually, the bean pod especially, but even the leaves being like that is typically an indicator of a nitrogen fixer. This here is Siberian pea shrub. The bean pods are edible, but not very good, to be honest. It's more of a starvation food, but it's a nitrogen fixer. It, importantly, because the way that the leaves are, it actually lets quite a bit of light through. You know, I am looking up through a ton of branches and light is getting through, which means no matter how much these spread and no matter how much people call these invasive plants, for example, life will still flourish underneath them because light's still getting down to the ground. So they spread and they heal, and they spread because they're spreading onto dead land and healing the planet, and we pull them out like pulling the scab off a dead wound, a festering wound. But these spread because the ground is so dead, and they build fertility, they build nitrogen via the symbiotic relationship with a mycorrhizal bacteria. They feed nitrogen into the soil from the air, they sequester carbon from the air, and then when the ground is fertile enough, they seed back and die, like seed, C-E-D-E, back and die and let the understory grow up through them. And they don't create monocultures, they create very, very robust, healthy polycultures. Very, very valuable trees. If you can find these, you can start saving seeds. Not yet, because they're not going to be ready. But in the fall, when you see these seed pods start opening up, as soon as they start opening up, they'll start dropping the seeds out. That's when the seeds are ready and most viable for germination. So start collecting some seeds, throw them in a little area in your garden, and start collecting some free plant material and free trees. What's better than free trees? I don't think anything. Here we found another beautiful little gem. We've got milkweed, which monarch butterflies absolutely love. We have vetch growing next to it. People consider both of these plants, this is the vetch here, it's hard to focus on. People consider both of these plants weeds, but they both have tremendously valuable uses. We've got more currants. Actually, this is not a currant because I can tell the berries are different. I'm actually going to take a photo and learn something new myself. Figure out what this is. Interesting. And we've got an understory or an overstory maple tree. Start learning how to identify trees. Very valuable skill to have. Milkweed brings monarch butterflies. Vetch is a nitrogen fixer. So this whole system, if you look in the grasses, there's vetch everywhere. This is what nature does. Nature plants in diversity. There's a grass field, but it's not just grass, wild grasses. There's vetch as nitrogen fixer. There's goldenrod as dynamic accumulator, deep taproot. There's a whole bunch of different things that many people would call weeds that are actually useful plants in the ecosystem. Not just wild grassland like it might look like. Look at this that I just found. Wild gooseberries. Super cool. Look at that. You can see where I waded in here. Look. Huge bush wild gooseberries. Turning ripe. Get out and get exploring. You never know what you find. Lots of free plant material. Take those wild gooseberries home. Save the seeds and plant them. Just bury the berries themselves. You never know, you get a random wild gooseberry popping up. Free plant material. There's no reason to stop. Look at these wild currants that are totally loaded up. Look how loaded those are. I'm going to leave all this stuff for the birds. I don't really like to wild forage too much. And I have lots of currants at home. But now I know where another source of wild currants are. They're all loaded up. Look at this. This is crazy. Look at the amount of food everywhere. Wild raspberries. Wow, they're good. Very tasty. It's not even the super obvious stuff like all the berry plants that you can identify and find in the wild. You know, this is not my property. Like I said, I'm at work. This is on my lunch break doing a quick video in a little wild area around my work. But it's just things like this. Look. Burdock. More burdock. So if you're in the woods and you're stuck, other people walk by a burdock, you might want to try digging it up, eating the roots. Better than starving to death. Completely wild area. You know, relatively, they mow the grass down here. But nobody plants these trees. There's just food. There's food for animals all out here. You just have to go find it. So get out there, get your cameras, download a Plant ID app. I like PlantNet. There's Picture This. There's a whole bunch of different ones. Get identifying. Take pictures. The Plant ID apps are kind of notorious for giving false positives. So just always use common sense and double check and question what you think you might find and what the app says. Look at this, jewelweed. This is jewelweed right here. This is a great, learn about what the plants do. You know, look them up on Plants for a Future. You look up jewelweed on Plants for Future, you'll find that if you have rashes, sores, cuts, you can take this stuff up, mash it up, rub it on your wound, and your wound is all going to be healed. Speaking of plants that do that, right in the ground, like I said, you look down anywhere, you're going to find this. This is plantain. I have it in my property. It's in pretty much any wild spot that you can think of. Same thing, this is a healer. You cut yourself in the wild, you're stuck in the wild, you have an infection. You know, you can do a lot worse than grabbing some plantain and putting it on it. You have to be careful with some of these healing plants. Sometimes they'll heal so fast that they'll seal the wound up on the surface and they won't be clean and healed on the bottom. And what happens when you do that is you can lock and trap an infection in underneath your skin. So just be super careful about that. You know, this looks a whole lot like garlic mustard. I'm guessing it probably is, but you could always double check. So just get better at identifying plants for yourself. Go out in wild spaces, take photos, start building that encyclopedic knowledge of plants. You're gonna learn some and forget them, so get that process going. You might have to see and learn a plant a few times and use a plant a few times before you kind of are confident in this. But that's it. Thanks for watching. Get out there, get changing your life, get building that mental model of all the plants around you. It's something that sadly is kind of going out of style. That knowledge is getting lost. Parents aren't passing it to their kids anymore. So you be the change and you change that dynamic. See you next time. So here's another tree that you'll probably find all over the place in temperate zones is hawthorn. Hawthorn is an incredibly invasive plant and it has very, very little uses. However, the interesting thing about hawthorn is that it's part of the pear family. So you can actually graft known cultivar pears onto a hawthorn plant and have a useless, weedy, invasive tree that does not much for anyone except for storing carbon. And you can replace that, at least in part, with edible food like a pear. And even more fun, practice your grafting skills and develop a life skill and practice on a tree that's not your own, that you may not hurt or injure. And the worst case is you injure a hawthorn tree, you know, nature will put another one back there pretty quick because they're very invasive and they can really take over and strangle out the diversity in a system. So there's hawthorn. Useless, but useful at the same time, if you know what you're doing. And before you ever think of eating something, never, never, never just eat something. Get your Plant ID app, post it to a Facebook foraging identification group, Google search it, look it up, look up Google image searches and make sure that you have what you have. Then go on plantsforafuture.org. You can just Google up whatever you found as your plant ID, mullein, say. Do PFAF mullein in Google. Go read what PFAF, Plants for a Future, says about mullein. And then when in doubt, when you finally decide I'm going to take this plant and bring it back home, you always follow the 90-10 rule. 90% of it stays in nature. Go further, 95-5. 95% of it stays in nature. You only take 5% out for you. Ideally, you're only taking out seed and not cutting. You're not disturbing the soil. You're not ripping plants up. You're not damaging other plants. But you can get a lot of plant material for free in the wild spaces of nature if you know how to identify plants. Just talking to you now, some wild burdock. Look it up, burdock's roots are edible. It's a great chop and drop tree. It's a dynamic accumulator. It's got a deep taproot. More currants. All in the wild, growing completely in the wild. So, have a look at them. If you ever decide to taste them, I would not just go eat a currant that I found in the wild. You always do the touch, the touch, lick, small taste, big taste test, and each one is separated by a day or so. 2 days, be safe. That way, you touch it, you get a rash, you're done. Don't do anything more. You just lick it, you get sick, it's mitigated. You won't get as sick as if you ate the whole thing. Never ever just eat a berry. You can die. You can literally die. So just be really, really careful. If you got 3 confirmations, you looked up Google images, it looks like a currant plant, you're gonna try it, you're gonna go for it. 1 currant, 1 tiny little berry, wait a couple days. Next time, 2 berries, wait a couple days. Build into it, and then understand what you know, eat only what you know. Ideally, you don't just go wild foraging, but you'll find sources of food like this viburnum that maybe aren't that great, but you can actually live off it. Some, you know, the high bush cranberry viburnum are a lot more edible than others. So just build your plant material, learn a new plant every single day. You learn a new plant every single day, after a year, you're a veritable walking encyclopedia of plants. So that's how I think you should get started, observing. Spend a full year, don't even do anything on your property. Just sit there and observe. Observe wild spaces, observe what weeds grow around you, learn about the weeds. The more we know about these plants, the less we define them as weeds. You know, there's no such thing as a weed. A weed is just a plant that you don't understand how valuable it is. My list of weeds has shrunken down to 2 plants that are near me: poison ivy, dog strangling vine. The reason I consider those weeds is because 1, I don't like poison ivy, it sucks super bad, and I always get it once a year. 2, strangling dog vine, it strangles and smothers out and is invasive, and it leads towards monoculture, and it leads to a stalled ecosystem. For the same reason, I'd be leaning towards calling cedar trees, white pine trees, as weeds, because I just don't think that they lead to healthy ecosystems. But other than that, my list of weeds used to be hundreds of plants long. The more I learned about them, the more I realized that they all have value and benefit in the system. The smaller and smaller my list of weeds became, and the more diverse my gardens and permaculture food forest became. And diversity for diversity's sake isn't a pursuit worth pursuing, but diversity in a stable system where every plant has a function and you're maximizing those functions, there's a lot of value in that. So don't go discounting the dandelions, the mullins, the lamb's quarters, the amaranth, the purslane. Don't go discounting all these plants because someone calls them a weed. Decide for yourself and learn about the plants. One last tip. See this? This is likely Queen Anne's lace. I believe it's Queen Anne's lace. If I look at the leaves, it looks like a carrot. Queen Anne's lace is in the carrot family. But any plant that looks like this, as a rule of thumb, don't eat. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble with some of the most poisonous plants on the planet. They actually can be confused for anything that looks like parsley flowers. So just be careful of that. Use that as a rule of thumb. No eating mushrooms, you know, unless you're really good at this stuff and have a lot of time under your belt with an expert. And no eating anything that looks like parsley.
Good, buddy? Good? Put the stick on here.
He's gonna eat them all.
He likes them.
Where's your mom?
She is in the photos right now.